I want to cover Chapter 2 in the OpenStax textbook, Choice in a World of Scarcity. I've added to the slides to enhance the presentation here a little bit, and you'll have a revised slide deck with my additions in Canvas. So we want to look at how individuals make choices based on their budgets. We want to look at something called the production possibilities frontier, which is basically the budget constraint for an entire economy, and social choices around that. And then talk about confronting objections to the economic approach. One of the things we look at is choices and trade-offs. We're always making those. Some people get a higher college education, some people don't. In general, the higher the degree, the higher the salary. This still tends to be true. So why aren't more people pursuing college degrees? Well, the answer that the textbook would give, and actually the real answer, is people make choices and trade-offs. Let me give you one example. My cousin and myself. Boy, when we were teenagers, we both wanted a black Corvette, or a Corvette of any color, I suppose, but the black was kind of the cool-looking car. I wanted a college education more. Let me fix this. He went to work at GM, at a General Motors factory right out of high school, which, as we grew up in Detroit, that made a lot of sense. I went to college. The fact that he went to work in a GM factory right out of high school meant he could buy a Corvette for probably about $4,000 right out at a discount even. So that's what he got. We both got what we want. He traded off a college education. I traded off a Corvette. To get my college education, he traded off a college education to get his Corvette. We probably both spent about the same amount of money back in those days. I went to a public university that cost about the same amount he spent, net on the Corvette, and probably about the same amount of time, 2-3 years. He paid for the Corvette. 4 years I went to college for an undergraduate degree. So how do individuals make choices based on their budget constraint? Well, you look at all possible consumption combinations of goods and services that a person can afford, given what the prices of these goods and services are. And when all income is spent, the boundary of this opportunity set, which we'll talk about what that means next. An opportunity set is all possible combinations of consumption that someone can afford, given the prices of goods and the individual's income. All income does not need to be spent, by the way. And one of your choices you could make with income is to save some. So if you value saving more than you do getting this or that, well, you will save. If you value having the item more than you value saving, you will buy the item that you wanted. So it's hard to compare all the goods and services one might buy. So one way of simplifying is to just look at two goods and the budget amount that is allocated to those goods. Everything else being the same, everything else being what they call already satisfied. And this is a principle in economics called ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, like ceteris being etc. So ceteris paribus, all things being equal, there's only two goods left to buy, and whatever money you have left over are the money you would allocate to those things. How do you make those trade-offs? So if we look at the trade-off of just two things, we'll understand how people make trade-offs on a more complicated level, which is harder to model, harder to look at graphically. So we limit it to two items. And often the items are completely unrelated. I mean, obviously, if you have $5 and you go into a grocery store and you're going to buy some fruit, and you've narrowed it down to apples and oranges, you could see how the trade-off works. Oh, I want 3 apples, no oranges, or I want 5 oranges, no apples, depending on how much money you have to spend, or some mix of the two. So with a limited amount of income to spend on things, consumers must choose what they need and want, and they make a trade-off of one for the other. So here's a classic example. Burgers and bus tickets. Unlike apples and oranges, it seems to be less related. But again, the products don't have to be related that we talk about. And you have a budget of $10. Burgers cost $2 and bus tickets cost 50 cents. I'm not sure what year it's from. I think you can still get a burger for $2 when it's, the value meals and all that. I'm not sure about the bus ticket for 50 cents. So each point on the budget line, so here we have on the x-axis bus tickets and burgers along the y-axis. And there's 5 points or 6 points named for famous letters, A, B, C, D, E, F. And here you could buy 5 burgers at $2, that's $10, so you get no bus tickets. And then you start trading off. If you trade off a burger and only get 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0 burgers, how many more bus tickets can you get? Like for each, given the price differential here, $2.50, if I forego 1 burger, I can buy 4 bus tickets. If I forego 2 burgers, I can buy 8 bus tickets, etc. So I have 4 bus tickets, 0 bus tickets, 5 burgers, 4 bus tickets, 4 burgers, 8 bus tickets, 3 burgers, 12 bus tickets, 2 burgers, 16 bus tickets, 1 burger, or I could spend all my money on bus tickets. Well, you might be hungry, so you need some burgers. You probably need to get home if you took the bus someplace, so you probably need some bus tickets. Where here is the mix of choices that you need? Well, obviously, if you travel to school 5 days a week and you take the bus, you need 10 bus tickets. So that's between 8 and 12. I'd buy 12 this week, and I could get 2 burgers, and next week I could buy 8 bus tickets and have 4 burgers. That's the kind of trade-offs people make. The opportunity cost is the cost of one of these items in terms of the other. The opportunity cost is the cost of one item is a lost opportunity to do something or consume the other thing. So we know that a burger costs $2. We know a bus ticket costs 50 cents. But when we talk about opportunity costs, we talk about the price of burgers in terms of bus tickets and bus tickets in terms of burgers. So when you think about it that way, 1 burger costs you 4 bus tickets. 1 bus ticket costs you 1/4 of a burger. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's calculated, like right now. So if we're going to work this out, and because notice that since this is a line, we have an XY axis, there's probably an equation for that line that we could gen up. How do you gen up such a thing? Well, the equation for any budget constraint is the following. You have, how many products do you have? Well, we're only going to have 2. So we have P1, the price of the first one, times the quantity that you buy. The quantity is the variable. The price is the fixed amount. So the price is a parameter. Where P and Q are the price and respective quantity of any number n. But we're only going to talk 2. So let's look at this burger bus ticket thing. The budget is 10. So that's going to go there, 10. The bus ticket, a burger costs you $2 right there. A bus ticket costs you 50 cents. And then we don't know how many quantities of burgers we're going to buy and how many quantities of bus tickets we're going to buy. So once you have this, since burgers was the y-axis, and we want the y equals mx plus b formula, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept, we solve for Q1. And that's exactly what they've done here. So they've taken this equation, they've added minus 2q to both sides, they've subtracted 10 from both sides, they, I don't know what they did. Oh, they multiplied by 2 by both sides. Why do they do that? It's an extra step that's not needed. They cleared the decimal by multiplying by everything by 2. So I don't have 50 cents anymore. I have 1q minus 4q1 equals minus 20q2. Then I divide by minus 4. So minus 20 divided by 4 is 5. And 1 divided by 4 is 1/4 or 0.25. So now we can use the equation to say if I want 8 burgers, for example, I multiplied by that by a quarter, I get 2. 5 minus 2 is 3. Was that a point on our curve? So if we go to 8 bus tickets, we go up there and it's 3. That's exactly right. And if we have 0, well, then we're going to get 5 burgers. That's the y-intercept. That's where the line crosses the y-axis. And that's where, when the number of bus tickets is 0, you've spent all your budget on burgers at $2 a piece. You get 5 of them. You can make a table, and you can draw a graph of it. And you have an equation of it. These are the only choices that don't involve decimal places. And normally when we do problems like this, one divides into the other evenly so we get whole numbers, or else it becomes a little bit more complicated to understand. If it's like, ooh, 1 bus ticket, 2 bus tickets is 3.75 burgers or something like that, then it's very complicated to try to envision. These models are to provide an example for you. So here's the other thing. You can read this if you want, and here's a source for all that stuff that was highlighted in blue. It's also kind of in your textbook. And if you go to this website, there's quizzes on opportunity costs. So if we look at opportunity costs, it's easy to see while looking at the graph, but opportunity costs can be calculated simply by dividing the cost of what is given up by what is gained. So for example, the opportunity cost of a burger is the cost of the burger divided by the bus ticket. So a burger is worth 4 bus tickets. The opportunity cost of a burger is 4 bus tickets. Either way, you have to give up 1 burger to get 4 bus tickets, or you have to give up 4 bus tickets to get a burger. The opportunity cost of a bus ticket is you put bus ticket price on top, and it's 0.25 or 1/4, or the slope. And notice that in that budget line right here, the slope is the opportunity cost of the x-axis in terms of the y-axis. And if I take the reciprocal, it's the opportunity cost of the y-axis item in terms of the x-axis item. All right, did I confuse you? Yes, probably. Some of you got it. Some of you are probably like, what did he just say? This means you have to do something. What is that word? Oh yes, study. You have to look at these slides. You can watch the video again, or you can read the textbook until you get it. It's an important concept to try to get. So it's the cost of one item in terms of the other. If you want the opportunity cost of A in terms of B, you take the price of A and divide it by the price of B. It's that simple or that complicated, which you'll hear me say that a lot. So identifying opportunity costs. So it's reasonable to refer to opportunity costs as price. Well, that's the reason we have money, because it's hard to keep track of all these trade-off costs of everything. And money is a measure that we use for the relative value of everything to each other. And it's a medium of paying for it. And that's where the scarcity comes in then in dollars. not in what you can buy with it. Well, and the scarcity in dollars is also limits what you can buy, obviously. So if your cousin buys a new bicycle for $300, then $300 measures the amount of other consumption that he has forsaken, all other consumption. Sometimes the prices are measured in dollars may not accurately capture the true opportunity costs, such as when costs of time are involved. Well, if you think about attending college, you have an out-of-pocket cost for attending college, including tuition, books, room and board, and other expenses, but you have the hours while you're attending, and those hours could have been spent working. So there's also the out-of-pocket cost and an opportunity cost of lost earnings that you've given up. My cousin that went to work at the GM factory, he was making more money than I was, clearly because he had a full-time 40-hour-a-week job, and probably when he worked overtime he made even more. He was able to spend those wages on a Corvette and then had money for other living expenses. When I went to college, I was just playing music on the weekend, so I had to, that kind of covered my college expenses. College was much cheaper at a state university in those days, but I lived at home to cover my living expenses. So you have to look at, it's not so simple as a 2-item chart shows, but that gives you an example of trade-offs and opportunity costs. So here's a discussion question. What's the opportunity cost of buying or leasing a car? You should ask that of yourselves, and we'll discuss that in class. Investing in different ways, savings accounts, certificates of deposits, mutual risk, stocks, whatever. What are you trading off? Well, if you have a savings account, you have a set but probably lower interest rate. If you buy it in a stock, you don't know if the stock's going to go up or down. So your opportunity costs are, you're trading off risk for reward, in a sense. If you're risk averse, you're going to probably put it, which means you only consider how much can I lose. I don't want to lose all my money. Okay, I'm not putting it in stock. I'm only putting it in a savings account or a certificate of deposit. If I am a risk taker and I see a tremendous upside in a stock, but I don't think of the fact that I could lose all my money, I would put all my money in stocks. Again, it's not that simple. We've made it simple to make a point. How about going out to eat versus preparing food at home? What's the opportunity cost? Is time one of the factors? Well, if you consider preparing food at home, you've spent time shopping for the items and ingredients. You've spent time preparing the items and ingredients. Presumably, you've spent less time walking or driving or public transporting yourself to the restaurant. But then there's cost. You pay for that. Your restaurant meal is probably more than preparing it at home. Even though restaurants have gotten very good, it depends on what kind of restaurant you go to. But lower cost restaurants can almost provide the meal at or below the cost of you preparing it yourself. How about the trade-off of health? If you prepare foods at home, you can have control over the ingredients, sodium, sugar, and fat, which, by the way, are the 3 main components of flavor and enjoyment of food. Walking or taking public transportation. What are you trading off? Cost versus time, health versus cost and time. So there's trade-offs we make all the time, every day. Do my homework or play video games. Work versus do my homework. We have trade-offs all the time. So one of the things we're going to talk about is these ideas here of marginal analysis, which is a hallmark of how we study economics these days. So when we talk about marginal analysis, we talk about the examining and looking at the benefits and costs of choosing, the risks and reward of choosing a little more or a little less of a good. If we go back to this curve, bus tickets and burgers, and I'm interested in bus tickets, what's the trade-off of moving from 8 to 12 bus tickets? What's the trade-off of moving from 3 to 2 burgers or 3 to 4 burgers? What happens when we consume one more? Why does that make us happier than and consuming less of the other item? Why does that make us happy? Why do we make that choice? Utility is the satisfaction and usefulness, or the value basically one gets from obtaining or consuming a good or service. If we talk about consuming like eating, let's say, who wants a donut? Oh, I want a donut. It sounds really good. And we have a full variety of them. So you can pick any kind you want. Great. Who wants a second donut? So we're doing that marginal analysis. What does the satisfaction and desire we have for one more? Well, the first one, probably everybody's, most people are going to jump to the opportunity for donut. The second one, people are going to start saying, well, I had a donut that was pretty good. I'm full, but how about a third donut, a fourth donut? Well, at some point, the extra value, the marginal utility, the extra satisfaction you get from donut 0 to 1 is probably huge. From donut 4 to donut 5 is probably nowhere equal to that first donut. And then people will choose not to do it. In fact, by the time you get to the fourth donut, you're probably looking for a glass of milk, water, or a cup of coffee. So we have this law of diminishing marginal utility. As a person receives more of a good, the additional or added, this marginal utility you get from additional one declines. Well, we use the example of donuts, but the same thing works for pizza. You're hungry. Who wants some pizza? Oh, sure, I'll take a slice. Boy, from 0 to 1, that was a great benefit. How about from slice 1 to 2? How many people is everybody going to take that? No. A lot of people will, after 1, say, okay, that's enough. Some people, more people will say after 2, that's enough. Some people have no control and look like me. So they might have 5 pieces of pizza. So what is that law of diminishing marginal utility? It's a person receives less satisfaction from the consumption or purchase of each additional item of the same thing. Utility is the satisfaction one gets, and this marginal analysis is kind of, in a baby way, what we just did. What happens if we take one more? If we buy one more? If we buy another? Then there's this idea of sunk costs that we want to introduce here too. These are costs that were incurred in the past and cannot be recovered. Was going to college a good decision? I think it was. But if I decided it wasn't, and I was worried about the amount of money, let's say back in the 70s when I went to college, and I know you're going to hate this, it probably cost me all of $25,000, which is like, a little bit more than a year's tuition of what people pay at North Park right now. Can I get that money back? No, I've already spent it. Impossible to get it back. My cousin who bought the Corvette, could he get his money back? Yeah, he could sell the car. Would he get all his money back? No, but he would get some of his money back. So the price of the car, only the value of the initial purchase price minus what he can get it, what he could sell it for at any given time, given the miles and years on it, that was the only sunk cost. Can't get that back. So for firms and people alike, dealing with sunk costs can be frustrating. A firm finds it hard to give up on a new product that's doing poorly because so much money was spent on it, but then you don't want to spend good money after bad. People make this mistake all the time in their houses. Let's say I'm selling my house and it's going to sell for $500,000, and you're thinking, well, gee whiz, I knew it was going to sell for $500,000, but I put $100,000 of repairs into it. And I put a new bathroom, and I put some new carpet, and I changed the roof. I should be able to get $600,000 for my house. No, the market's going to give you $500,000. Those items that therefore you spent it on is what they call a sunk cost. Now, there are some costs that realtors will tell you you can get some or all of it back on your house. You redo a kitchen, and the example I used was probably bad because I think any redoing of bathrooms also is good. I don't know if it seems to vary with the times, but either carpeting or taking out carpet and putting in hardwood floors, you can get some of that money back. But if you paint the house or re-roof it, that's not going to substantially change the price. So those are sunk costs. So the lesson of sunk costs is to ignore the past errors or the past costs and make the decisions based on what will happen in the future. To hammer this point home, whenever you have an item in this class that you're not sure exactly, you don't understand it fully, go to Investopedia, look it up. So here, what is a sunk cost? The money that's already been spent, which cannot be recovered. Very simple. In business, the axiom that one has to spend money to make money is reflected in the phenomenon of sunk cost. A sunk cost differs from future costs that a business may face, such as decisions about inventory purchase costs or product pricing. Sunk costs are excluded from future business decisions because you've already spent it, and it should not have any impact on your future. So they've already occurred, are typically not included in the consideration when making future decisions, and are in contrast to relevant costs, which are future costs that have yet to be incurred. So an example, XYZ Clothing makes baseball gloves, pays $5,000 a month for its factory lease, and the machinery has been purchased outright for $25,000. The company produces a basic glove that costs $50 and sells for $70. The manufacturer can sell the basic model and earn $20 profit per unit. Alternatively, it can continue the production process by adding $15 in cost and sell a premium glove for $90. And now you're going to get more profit, right? You're going to sell it for $40 more and get $25 profit. To make this decision, the firm compares 15 additional costs with the 20 added revenue to make the premium glove in order to make $5 more in profit. The cost of the factory and the lease are both sunk costs and don't matter in the decision. If a sunk cost can be eliminated at some point, it becomes a relevant cost and should be considered part of it. So if XYZ Clothing is considered shutting down a production facility, any of the sunk costs that have end dates should be included in the decision. So the revenue, and if you can sell off the equipment for some amount of money, you could recoup some of those costs are no longer sunk, and because they're part of a future decision. When we look at countries versus individuals, we're looking more at the macro level than the micro level. If we look at a budget line between two items that the economy produces, we call that a production possibilities frontier curve versus a budget line. So the slope of the production possibilities frontier shows the opportunity cost at any point. Now notice this is not a line. It's more of a concave curve. This production possibilities frontier shows a trade-off between looking at social resources between healthcare and education. And if you spend all your money on education and none on healthcare, it's probably not good. If you spend all your money on healthcare and none on education. But the reason it's not a straight line is I get more value in the case, and this is probably a good example, if I spend it on both healthcare and education, under the assumption that educated people are going to know more about healthcare and do more preventative things, take care of themselves theoretically better, and therefore healthcare costs. You get more for your healthcare dollar because you're not spending it on people that haven't taken care of themselves and just expect the healthcare system to solve all their healthcare problems. So at point A, all the resources go to healthcare. At B, most go to healthcare, but we start trading off. At D, most of the resources go to education, and F, all of it goes to education. So a society could choose any combination of healthcare and education in the production possibilities frontier. It does not have enough resources to produce outside, which is here, and it could produce less. But actually, if everything else is taken care of, again, that concept of ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, you want to allocate all the money and try to be on the production possibilities frontier. So the shape of the production possibilities frontier and the law of diminishing returns are kind of related. As additional increments of resources to produce a good or service are added, the marginal benefits from those additional increments will decline. So this law of diminishing marginal utility is a more specific case of the law of diminishing returns. Here's an article that goes into more depth on explaining the shape of this curve. It's not for everybody to read, but if you're fascinated and interested, which is one thing I try to encourage, do stuff beyond what I'm asking you for. If something doesn't make sense, go find some evidence someplace else. Google it, read other things. Become smarter than just doing the minimum work in a class. There's a trade-off involved in that too. Okay, so healthcare and education. Let's continue looking at this. So the curve shows that as we add more resources to education and move to the left along the x-axis, the amount we give to healthcare diminishes. That makes sense. It's like bus tickets and burgers. It's just the shape of the curve is different. If we add more resources to healthcare, so we move up the curve this way, we have to move more down the curve this way. The two major differences between a budget constraint and a production possibilities frontier is the budget constraint is a straight line. Slope is given by relative pricing of two goods, which are fixed, so the slope doesn't change. Obviously, if the price changes, which prices do change, but at any given time, we're taking a snapshot where the prices are fixed. If we wake up tomorrow and the prices have changed, like in the COVID pandemic when we went to bed one day and gasoline was $3 a gallon, and we woke up the next day or a week later and the price of gasoline was $2 a gallon, well, then you have to recalculate everything. So the slope is given by the relative pricing of two goods, which are fixed at that point in time, so the slope doesn't change. The production possibilities has a curve shape because of the law of diminishing returns, so the slope is different at various points of the curve. So it's a changing trade-off. The absence of specific numbers on the axis of the PPF, of the production possibilities frontier, because the exact amount of resources in an imaginary economy may not be known. In fact, how can we trade off, if we look at the United States, education and healthcare, how could we possibly draw that curve? For an individual, I could do bus tickets and burgers. I could do watermelons and movie tickets. I could do gasoline versus pizzas. I could do pens versus bus tickets or whatever, right? But the PPF is more of an example. It's more of a way of discussing and showing differences. So if we look at on an individual set, we have this budget constraint. And the social production possibilities frontier, or the production possibilities frontier, shows the constraints under which individual consumers and society as a whole operate. Both diagrams show the trade-off in choosing one good versus the other. So now let's talk about two kinds of efficiency. And these efficiencies are associated with the production possibilities frontier, and we'll show you examples of them. Productive efficiency, when it is impossible to produce more of one good without decreasing the quantity produced of the other good or service. Allocative efficiency means when the mix of goods produced represents the mix that society most desires. And this is best shown by an example. If we look here at R, I can produce more of one or the other good and still be within my production possibilities frontier range, right? So R is not an efficient point to be. I want to be on the curve. If R was on a curve like B, C, or DR, if I'm here and I want to produce more education, I can't go up this way and keep the amount of healthcare the same. Let's go to C, since C has differences in both. If I go to C to D in terms of education, so I increase to education level 3, I'm forced to reduce the amount of healthcare. Obviously, if I go from C to B, where I spend less on education and more on healthcare, you can see I give up this amount of education spend for a wee bit extra in healthcare. So as I do this, if I'm here, I spend a lot. If I go from here to here, I'm spending all on education. And someone says, hey, we should spend something on healthcare because it's important. So if I make a wee bit change in education, I get a huge change in healthcare. But as I go up, I get that diminishing return. Every time I trade off, and somewhere around here, I start trading off bigger chunks of education for smaller gains in healthcare and vice versa. So the other thing is productive efficiency means I'm on the curve. Allocative efficiency says which point on the curve is the best for society. Productive, allocative efficiency. Know the difference. So, how much of a good a country decides to produce depends on how expensive it is versus buying it from another country. And we'll show an example of this. Countries have different opportunity sets, opportunity costs for producing this good versus that good, and it's based on their geography, their climate, their natural resources, the education and technology levels within the country, the skill sets of their workforce, all kinds of things. So comparative advantage is when a country can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another country. Here's two countries, Brazil and the United States. Both can produce sugarcane and wheat. Both can produce sugarcane and wheat. Obviously in Brazil, they're producing sugarcane. They can produce a lot more sugarcane and a lot less wheat. And the U.S. can produce a lot more wheat, but a lot less sugarcane. So if the presidents of the two countries get together, which probably doesn't happen at that level, but they can set a trade agreement that allows U.S. wheat to be traded for Brazilian sugar. And they might be two separate things. We're going to buy wheat from you, we give you dollars. Hey, listen, we got dollars, we'll buy sugar cane from you. Because it's much better for Brazil to focus on this and the U.S. to focus on this. So the U.S. PPF is flatter than the Brazil one, implying the opportunity cost for wheat in terms of sugar cane is lower in the U.S. than in Brazil. So the opportunity cost for sugar cane is lower in Brazil. Therefore, it makes sense for the two to trade with each other. All right, let's look at the economic approach. The economic approach is a lot of what we've covered here, at least start to introduce. Scarcity and choice, purposeful behavior, and marginal analysis. This is the economic choice to business and country relationships and microeconomics, basically. So scarcity and choice. Because we cannot have it all, not Al, cannot have it all, everything we want. We cannot have it all. We cannot have everything we want. We have to make choices and trade-offs, like the burgers and bus tickets, like wheat and sugar in the United States or sugar and wheat in Brazil. People are guided by purposeful behavior. In other words, human behavior is based on rational self-interest. And I probably should put rational in quotes because you'll see when we talk later that we can't always assume this. People are not as rational as we think, but oftentimes people acting in their own self-interest is. And then the other thing, marginal analysis, comparing the benefits and costs of producing a little bit more or less, selling a little bit more or less, buying a little bit more or less, consuming a little bit more or less, one more or one less of a product or service. So what are the benefits and costs? That's kind of like the economic approach. So when we confront an objection to the economic approach, people, firms, and society do not act in a way that fits the economic way of thinking. Well, it might be reasonable as a first approximation to analyze them with the tools of economic analysis, and we'll address this in later chapters. But sometimes objections in understanding the economic approach to decision making. People and firms and society should not act this way. Well, the economic approach portrays people as self-interest, but economics is not a form of moral instruction. So people shouldn't be self-interest. They should worry about society as a whole and be nice to everybody and et cetera, et cetera. So here we're seeking to describe economic behavior as it actually exists. This is called a positive statement, which describes the world as it is. These are factual. We try to avoid what we call normative statements, which describe how the world should be. These statements are subjective questions of opinion. If we think about everything we've gone through in this COVID pandemic, what are the positive statements and what are the normative statements made? What are the we had with the killing of George Floyd, people were making all kinds of statements on how we should be as a society. Those are normative statements, not positive statements. They're positive about that's the way we should be, but in an economic definition, a positive statement describes the world as it is. The price per gallon of oil is $22 a gallon for crude oil. A normative statement is the price of that barrel of oil should be $10. Well, it's not. It's 22. I understand that you think it should be 10. And I tend to agree with you. That would be wonderful, but it's not. So people's freedom to make their own economic choices has a moral value worth respecting. And how do you account for that? a lot of we're going to talk about neoclassical versus a different branch of economics in an ensuing week, but we're not going to get into it deeply here. So one of the ways we look at this is this notion of Adam Smith's. Adam Smith is considered maybe the first economist, and he wrote his book, The Wealth of Nations, and he talked about this idea of an invisible hand. It's a concept that individual self-interested behavior can lead to positive social outcomes. Consumers will encourage businesses to offer goods and services that meet their needs. And it's possible that a broader social good can emerge from selfish individual actions. Well, this depends on, I think, the population of density and population of the world. It seemed to work when the world was not as populated as it is now. And some argue that it can still work now. I'm not sure myself. Self-interest in economics does not imply self-interest in all aspects of life. So I want to buy a house. You want to sell a house. I'm interested in your house. In my self-interest, wouldn't it be wonderful if you just gave it to me for free? Your self-interest would be, well, I'd really like it if you just paid me $5 million for it. Even though in my mind I know it's only worth $400,000 or $600,000 or $800,000, depending on where it is. Well, I want to buy a house. You want to sell a house. That's both our self-interest. By negotiating and bartering, we establish a price that is of agreement to both of us. We have a deal. If everybody in the same geographical area that's wanting to buy a house and wanting to sell a house is collectively doing the same thing on a larger scale, the market establishes a fair market value for the house, and then people are getting what they want. So you could be in one part of the country and buy a house for $400,000, but that same house maybe put in a different part of the country might be worth $2 million, or might be worth only $200,000. It really depends on how many people are buying, how many people are selling, and if there's more demand or more supply, which is what we're going to talk about next in the next chapter. But this idea of the invisible hand goes even beyond this, and there's some videos in a paper one that we're going to do that will help you explore that. So again, if you're not sure what the invisible hand is, go to Investopedia. These slides will be posted in Canvas. I'll let you look through them, or you can go to Investopedia and just search on invisible hand, and all this will come up. So it's a metaphor for unseen forces moving the free market economy. Through individual self-interest and freedom of production as well as consumption, the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. At one point, making and smoking cigarettes seemed to be really popular. People liked it. Way less so today. And who knows, maybe the consumption of this good or that good that is very popular today and seems to be for the benefit of society as a whole, in a few years will flip-flop. So the invisible hand is part of this laissez-faire, which is French for let do or let go approach to the market. In other words, let the market float itself. Don't try to control the prices. And this is one of Adam Smith's great concepts. So the takeaways here are a metaphor for how, in a free economy, self-interested individuals operate through a system of mutual interdependence. He introduced the concept in the book The Wealth of Nations, which was 1776, the year this nation was founded. Each free exchange creates signals about which goods and services are valuable and how they bring to market. Here's a quote from the book. Every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interests, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectively than when he really intends to promote it. I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good. Think about that a little bit. Is it true? Is it not? I leave you with two cartoons, both from the New Yorker, which is a great source of a higher level humor. These are two guys probably not doing well, or as well as they want. And it says, there it is again, the invisible hand of the marketplace, giving us the finger. Ha ha. And this is, I think, my favorite because I lived in Connecticut, and I was like 2 towns down the train line to New York from Darien. Darien and Greenwich are probably and New Canaan, most corporate executives, a lot of corporate executives and CEOs and such live in those towns, and they're pretty wealthy towns. So here it says, corporate leaders gather in a field outside Darien, Connecticut, where one of them claims to have seen the invisible hand of the marketplace. What can I say? Economics humor. Maybe you don't appreciate it now. Maybe in 10 years you'll think it's funnier. That's it for this lecture. Thank you so much.